Last night on TNT, Nikola Jokic received his third league MVP award. Now he has three MVPs total for his career when it comes to league MVPs. It puts them in rarefied air. Very few guys have won three league MVPs or more. I think it's like on the top of my head, I can only think of LeBron, Bill Russell, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Magic Johnson, Michael Jordan, and Larry Bird. So I think that's like six guys in the history. No, I also forgot Moses Malone. Moses Malone won three league MVPs. So only seven guys in the history of the league have won three or more league MVPs, which which is an extraordinary accomplishment by Jokic. So you gotta give him credit for that. Shaq was salty about this because he kept on going off about how Shea Gilgeous Alexander should have won the MVP award. I can see the argument for Shea. He had a great season. Statistically, he was amazing. Just his numbers seemed like Michael Jordan numbers, especially when it comes to efficiency. I respect that, and I wouldn't have been unhappy if he had gotten the award. I'm actually neutral. I'm a Spurs fan, so I can be objective about it, but I thought he was very well deserving of it. But I also don't think it was highway robbery that Jokic got it. The Nuggets won almost as many games as the Thunder. And if you're just watching the playoffs now, you can see this Nuggets team is not really as good as people thought they were. To be honest, this year they had a lot of injuries. Their bench was shot up, and obviously he's getting exposed right now in the playoffs. But the despite all of that, OKC only won, I believe, one more game than them. So I think that's what makes the case for Jokic. Only reason I brought all this stuff up is because I feel Shaq is taking out his anger on Jokic for not having more than one league MVP in his career. I think he's very bitter of it, and he always feels that he should have won more. He makes terrible arguments on why he should have gotten it. From a statistics standpoint, I don't think he deserved more than one. Excuse me, because let's go through his career. So obviously he's not going to win the MVP award in his rookie year. That's not going to happen. And excuse me, I got allergies. But so let's discount his rookie year. His second year in the league, he was pretty good. He led his team to 50 wins, but he was not going to win MVP that year. That was the year Elijah Wan got the MVP, and rightfully so. Just the Rockets won the championship that year, so there's no questions in that. Let's fast forward to the 94-95 season. He had a great year, but David Robinson got the MVP, and Robinson deserved the MVP. The Spurs won several more games than the Orlando Magic that year. Granted, they didn't get to the NBA Finals like the Magic did, but they lost to the Rockets in 6 games, while Shaq's Magic got swept by the same Rockets team that won the title that year. So again, you can't say Shaq was robbed that year. Let's fast forward to the 95-96 season. That was Michael Jordan's redemption season. Clearly, he was the best player of the league that year. He was dominant. He was back in form. Bulls won 72 games. No question. He deserved the MVP over Shaq that year. Let's fast forward to the 96-97 season. Shaq goes to the Lakers. The Lakers finish in fourth place in the Western Conference. Karl Malone had a much better season than Shaq. He led his Jazz to the best record in the West. He also eliminated Shaq's Lakers in round two. So obviously Shaq didn't deserve the MVP that year either. Let's fast forward to the 97-98 season. Shaq's Lakers finish in second place in the West. They have a great record. Shaq puts up great numbers. But Michael Jordan wins the MVP that year. And Jordan deserved it because the Bulls had injuries throughout that season. I think Scottie missed the first 20 or 30 games of the season. And Michael pretty much had to carry that team for most of that year until Scottie got back. And they still finished with the second best record in the league. You got to give him credit for that. Just he was, again, typical MJ that year. Let's fast forward to let's stick on that season. So Shaq then gets swept by Karl Malone in the Western Conference Finals, proving again he really wasn't worthy of that award. Now let's go to the lockout season. Shaq, I think this was the year where Shaq really got a lot of hate because the Lakers had a lot of high expectations with Jordan being retired, that they were going to take over the league and they were going to win the championship that year. And they underachieved. They finished in fourth place that year. They ended up getting swept by the Spurs. And Karl Malone got an MVP that year. I actually thought Malone wasn't worthy of it. They should have given it to Tim Duncan, but Shaq wasn't robbed in any scenario of that. Let's go to 2000. Shaq wins the MVP, very well deserved. He was the best player in the league that year. He was dominant. You can't argue against it. That was really the only year he deserved the MVP. Let's fast forward to 2001. Allen Iverson wins the MVP. Now, this one, it is close. I think Shaq, if he wants to complain, this is a season he could have a bone about this one. But then again, Iverson had a great year. He led a less talented Sixers team to actually a better record than the Lakers. Granted, they were tied for the same record, but he got them the tiebreaker. You look at that Sixers team, they had no one that could score on that team. It was Iverson and a bunch of elite role players and Dikembe Mutombo, who was a defensive superstar, but not a scorer. So he had to do a great carry job. So he edges out Shaq in my mind. So I don't feel that was robbery. Let's go to the 2002 season where Tim Duncan got the MVP. And I felt Duncan deserved it that year. He played in, I think, 82 games versus Shaq playing in 67 games that year. And on top of that, his Spurs team was less talented than the Lakers. He had no All-Stars playing with him that year. And they still won as many games as Shaq's Lakers with just less talent. So, again, Tim was worthy of it. Now, the 2003 season, Shaq, again, is not playing in the majority of his games. Well, I won't say majority, but he misses quite a few games that year. He plays 67 games again. He has a good season, but Tim Duncan has a better season. He leads the Spurs to the best record in the West, and he has no All-Stars on his team again. And he leads them to the best record in the West. And not only does he back it up, he's the MVP that year. He takes out Shaq's Lakers in the playoffs in the second round in convincing fashion, blowing them out by nearly 30 points on their home court. So definitely didn't deserve the MVP that year. Let's fast forward to the 2003-2004 season. The guy who won the MVP that year was Kevin Garnett. Garnett's numbers were superior to Shaq's that year. They were ridiculous, the best numbers of his career. He led the Timberwolves to the best record in the West. I know some people will say, like, well, Shaq's Lakers defeated his Timberwolves in the conference finals. That is correct, but I still felt he was worthy of that award. And I felt even in that series, he was unlucky with Sam Cassell getting hurt. Prior to that series, Cassell was his regular self. I think they could have beaten the Lakers in that series. And Shaq's numbers weren't great compared to his dominant years that year. 21.5 points a game, 11.5 rebounds. Those are good numbers, but not as dominant when he was at his peak, getting 28, 29, 27, and 12, 13 rebounds and a few blocks. So you could tell that's when he was really starting to fall off from his prime, and he was starting to decline. Now he goes to Miami. 04-05 season, and this is the one where he gets very angry about, where he feels Steve Nash robbed him of his MVP. But for being honest, Miami finished first in the East, but so did the Suns, and no one expected the Suns to finish first in the West. They were a lottery team prior to Nash joining. Nash lifted them out of being a lottery team to an elite team. They just had the misfortune playing the Spurs in the Western Conference Finals, but they won over 60-some games in a much harder conference. And they lost to the eventual champions. You can't knock Nash for that. Shaq lost in his conference finals in the East, so I feel they're kind of even in that. The tiebreaker to me is Nash got more wins with his team. And you look at Shaq's numbers that year: 22.9 points, 10.4 rebounds, 2.3 blocks. Those are good numbers, but they're not the great numbers he had during his peak. I felt that Shaq was trying to steal that award by not being as dominant as he was in the past, and thought the media was going to throw him a bone simply because they hated Kobe that year, and they were trying to hype up Shaq as this great guy, and he was not the problem with the Lakers. It was Kobe. For those of you old enough to remember it, that was the case. They kept on overpraising Shaq that year simply because they were angry at Kobe and what he had done and how he'd gotten Shaq traded, all the other crap. Also still bitter about the Colorado situation. He really benefited from that, but those numbers weren't great. They were not great enough for me to put him over Nash, really, to be honest. I don't think he deserved the MVP that year. And he proved that by losing to the Pistons in the conference finals. He couldn't get over the hump again for a second year in a row. Now, 05-06, he still claims he was robbed that year, but I don't believe he was even the best player on the Miami team he played on. That was Dwayne Wade. Dwayne Wade was the best player in 2006 on the Miami Heat. He's the one who led them to that championship, especially in the finals against the Mavericks when Shaq was starting to look old and washed up in that final series. That year, Shaq averaged 20 points and 9 rebounds and 1.8 blocks. His worst season since his rookie year. There's no way he was worthy of MVP that year. Nash, again, deserved it more. The Suns overachieved that year without having Amari Stoudemire. They won more games than Miami, but granted, Miami won the championship. But again, you can't give it to Shaq for that reason because he wasn't even the best player on his Heat team. That was the year where Wade morphed into a superstar. So Shaq in conclusion was never robbed of MVPs. He just wasn't dominant enough, didn't win enough, or couldn't set himself far above the pack when it came to being the best player in the league. Those years when he felt he should have gotten more than one. That's what I look at. He's just bitter now because he wants to be in the GOAT conversation badly. He's a narcissist. He needs that attention, and he's frustrated because he can never rewrite history, and he so badly wishes he could. But it's really on him for not trying hard enough throughout his career. Granted, without trying hard enough, he still had a ridiculous career. In my eyes, top 10 greatest player of all time. But he has no one to blame but himself for his shortcomings, and he should just own it and just live his life. He has a great, privileged life, and he should just be grateful for that and just shut the fuck up when it comes to complaining all the time about being robbed of MVP awards in the past. That's the way I look at it. It's a long rant, but I just had to get that out there.